Reaching new heights. China's president is in Pakistan with billions of dollars in investments. But is it only about economics, or is this part of a larger effort to expand China's influence in the region? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. It is no secret that Beijing is trying to expand its influence across Central and South Asia to connect China by land and sea to the Middle East and Europe. And nothing speaks louder to that ambition than the amount of money the Chinese government is willing to spend. President Xi Jinping arrived in Pakistan on Monday. And he made quite the entrance, announcing a $46 billion investment package that'll create a new network of roads, railways and pipelines between the two countries and give China a much coveted access to the Indian Ocean. It's hoped the investment will strengthen ties that go back decades, but some say it also points to something else, the decline of American influence in Pakistan. The size of the investment could transform parts of Pakistan. It includes around $15 billion of much-needed energy investment in coal, gas, wind and solar projects, as well as a $44 million optical fibre cable that will be built between the countries. But the biggest part of this deal is a so-called economic corridor or trade route that will stretch for 3,000 kilometres and give China direct access to the Indian Ocean. Before we get into today's discussion, Nicole Johnston sets things up from the Pakistani capital, Islamabad.
High in the Karakoram Mountains, close to the border of China and Pakistan, China is expanding the world's highest international paved road, the Karakoram Highway, and expanding its influence. This is part of a $43 billion project called the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. It will stretch from Kashgar in China's Xinjiang province all the way south through Pakistan to the port city of Gwadar.
When the China-Pakistan corridor becomes operational, China would be directly connected to the Middle East or the Gulf states and to Africa. And this would be a big dividend accruing directly from the corridor.
Construction has started on a Chinese-funded deep-sea port in Gwadar. It will cut the time it takes for goods and oil to reach China from the Middle East from 12 days to 36 hours. And there are all sorts of deals linked to it: coal, solar and wind power, oil and gas pipelines, highways and railways.
This is one of the most impressive buildings in Islamabad, a $30 million convention centre paid for by China. The two countries have a long-tested relationship, one that's based on cultural, economic and strong military ties.
China is Pakistan's biggest supplier of weapons. It helped develop its latest jet fighter, the JF-17 Thunder.
Pakistan is a country that has been plagued by problems from all around. Unless we rise on our own feet, we really cannot depend on others. China has been far more trustworthy, is a much more reliable friend of Pakistan, and I think that is known universally.
The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor revives the old Silk Road traders used centuries ago. A nod to the past, while developing new industries for the future. Nicole Johnston, Al Jazeera, Islamabad.
Let's bring in our guests now in Beijing. Jia Xiudong, a senior research fellow at the China Institute of International Studies. In Islamabad, Musharraf Zaidi, former Pakistani Foreign Affairs advisor. And in London, Rani Singh, advisor on security for Forbes Asia and Specialist on Indo-China relations. A warm welcome to all of you. Let me start off with you, Musharraf Zaidi. Potentially a lot of money heading Pakistan's way. How's this been discussed there?
Well, I think the first thing that Pakistanis are conscious of is the fact that, unlike other donors to Pakistan, Chinese investments in Pakistan or Chinese contributions to the Pakistan economy tend to be in kind, tend to be spent through Chinese actors, companies, contractors, firms. So this money that, this purported sort of 28 billion is what was signed today. 46 billion is the CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. That's the total value of that corridor in terms of the physical infrastructure. And then there's more money beyond that for other elements of the relationship that President Xi Jinping has apparently assigned to sort of lubricate this vision that he has, and Pakistan is a part of that larger vision that the Chinese have. So I think Pakistanis are seeing this with, I think, cautious optimism. The optimism, of course, comes from the fact that it's hard to get foreign direct investment interested in Pakistan, and that a lot of the reason for that is the viability or the saleability of the idea of Pakistan being a safe and stable place in which people can make money from around the world. Sure. So I think the Chinese investment here not only solves the problem of the FDI, but also potentially solves the problem of stability.
But I can see the cautious optimism because $66 billion was pledged between 2001 and 2011. Only 6% ever came through.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's where the cautious element of the optimism comes from. I also think that a lot of Pakistanis today don't look at the fact that maybe in the past a lot of these MOUs have failed to materialize, that is seen as something that's really on Pakistan and on Pakistanis. I think that the Pakistani government and the Pakistani state, the Pakistani military, the Pakistani political elite, and the Pakistani intelligentsia, people who influence opinion here, we all sort of need to come together and realize that ultimately the feasibility of these investments will depend on the execution of the Pakistani end of the spectrum. That is, will the areas in which roads need to be built be stable enough for roads to be built there? Will the contracting processes allow for these things to happen as swiftly as sometimes they've not happened in the past? So I think a lot of the responsibility and a lot of the burden on delivering this, not the financial part so much, but the operational part, will once again rest with Pakistan.
Jia Xiudong, if any country is going to make a move, I mean, this is certainly a way of making a move, isn't it? And a way of ensuring that you're pushing all competition out of the way.
Really, this is a top priority for China to work with Pakistan to make sure that the CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, will succeed. And this project is actually beneficial for both China and Pakistan. And of course, not many countries now invest in Pakistan, but hopefully with increased Chinese investment in Pakistan, and the environment for investment will improve for other countries. So maybe it's good for not only China and Pakistan, but also good for other countries, and it provides more opportunity rather than any competition.
Musharraf made a point that much of this business will be handled, as is traditionally the case in many other parts of the world, by Chinese firms. So how is China going to make sure that this money gets through to Pakistan, that they honor their pledge and that everybody benefits?
Well, actually China is investing in many parts of the world and has experiences, very good experiences of investment in developing countries, not only in South Asia, but also in Southeast Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, in Central Asia. So China is good at this kind of projects. And certainly there are difficulties and challenges in Pakistan. For example, the security environment there. But through cooperation between the Chinese and the Pakistani governments, certainly, these projects will proceed despite of these challenges and difficulties.
All right. Rani Singh, what do you make of this move, both from an economic and a geopolitical point of view?
I think it's very interesting what's happening today. It actually plays into the larger Chinese agenda of influencing the region and the world economically and geopolitically. It's not just about a great big love-in with Pakistan, because reporting over in South Asia, I've noticed that China is putting an awful lot of money and investment into Bangladesh, into Nepal, and relations between India and China are warming up for mainly bilateral trade purposes. So it really plays into that.
So it's really, sorry, if I can say, reshaping possibly the economic and political order in Asia.
Yes, and it's part of China's international plan, because by creating this kind of maritime Silk Route from the Indian Ocean through across to the Pacific Ocean, it strengthens China in so many different ways. China seeks to establish road, sea and rail connectivity through to Europe and to Africa. So this plays into that.
I was wondering what you have to make about that, Xiudong, about the fact that China is trying to access and secure its future by road and by sea.
Yes, China is undergoing a transformation in its economy, and so China is striking trade deals with many countries in Asia and other parts of the world. And China needs markets for its investment, for its expertise. And also China hopes that with increased economic cooperation between China and Pakistan and other countries in the region, China will have a better environment for its for the country, for greater stability in its periphery. So China's intention for this CPEC is not only trade and economic benefits. Of course, economic trade considerations are primary. It also has strategic implication for China's relations with Pakistan, with countries in the region. So hopefully with an improved economy, there will be a greater stability in the region, which will be better, beneficial for China, because of, poverty is sometimes a breeding ground also for, extremism. With improved economic conditions, and the people will, enjoy better life, and they may not be subject to, propaganda of extremism. So it's good for China, for Pakistan, for other countries in the region.
This is something both China and Pakistan suffers from: violence and insecurity. In China, the Xinjiang province with the Muslim Uyghur issue there, and of course the tribal areas in Pakistan, Musharraf. How will this greater access between the two countries help or hinder this situation?
Well, I think, it's not just China and Pakistan that are suffering from the violence that you spoke of. As you know, Afghanistan has been torn asunder for more than a decade. In the latest round of violence there, there's been a pretty significant uptick in violence in India. Generally in the region, the emergence of ISIS and the changing dynamic of Iran's relationship with the rest of the world, particularly the Western world, all of these things are playing into probably what in Beijing is seen as a need to create codependencies, economic codependencies, in which the stakes for stability and peace, people's stakes in stability and peace are increased, and people can mutually benefit. Different people from different countries can mutually benefit from increased connectivity and trade. So I think it's an exciting sort of broad strategic bent, and it's different from the kind of conflict and the kind of approach that's been taken particularly in Afghanistan, by the international community. As you'll know, China's been heavily involved in helping prod Afghanistan and its government along over the last few months. The first bilateral visit of President Ashraf Ghani in Afghanistan was to China, which was an unprecedented sort of a step that the Afghans took. So I think it isn't just, CPEC is specific to China and Pakistan, and this visit, of course, is specific to the bilateral relationship between China and Pakistan. But what China is doing and what President Xi Jinping is doing is really this Pakistan-China relationship is a subset. It's one piece in a larger strategic sort of approach, which is less dependent on violence and conflict and more dependent on interdependence and economic activity across borders.
Rani, if these rest of regions benefit in Pakistan, the Uyghurs in China, and of course Afghanistan, I mean, that could be incredibly important, couldn't it? It could make such a difference.
That's the hope on the part of China and Pakistan particularly. Nawaz Sharif, Pakistan's Prime Minister, has a hope that Pakistan can become an Asian tiger. He stated this around 1997. But there are lots of ifs here, which we're kind of ignoring, although my colleague in Islamabad did touch on it. The Uyghur unrest in the northwest province of China can be linked, and the fear is that it might link up with Islamic extremism in Pakistan and maybe even the Pakistani Taliban. So it is hoped that with investment into the Balochistan area that China's doing this way through the construction of the Gwadar port, that this can somehow address that situation. But the ifs include the fact that Balochistan has been heavily ignored. It's an area of deep unrest and poverty, and there has to be willing on the part of the Pakistani establishment to invest and address Balochistan for that investment to flourish and to come to fruition. So that's a big if. Also, I think that it helps China in so many ways to have this what is called soft diplomacy, because as I said before, it's expanding across through the soft diplomacy into Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. And neighboring countries, so Myanmar. So it's at the same time strengthening China enormously. When I've been into the neighboring countries, I've noticed these big, wide roads that lead from within China, from Beijing, right down to the sea practically, right down to India's borders. And though it's said that these help trade links and business in country and China's soft diplomacy, it's no coincidence that these big, wide, hard roads are big enough to take convoys of tanks should the need arise.
It could be all about that, couldn't it, as well? India, Xiudong, how much of this is about containing India? Because China is also going to be providing 8 submarines to Pakistan. Will that change the power balance with India?
Actually, China, of course, China, Pakistan are all-weather strategic partners. But at the same time, China is developing friendly relations with India. Actually, China enjoys stable relations with both countries. And China encourages the two countries, Pakistan and India, to improve their relations. Actually, in the past, China has tried in this regard. So China doesn't want to see competition between the two countries, doesn't want to see escalating tensions between the two countries. Of course, China supplies some, military equipment to Pakistan, exports some weapons to Pakistan. But at the same time, China also values its relation with India. But India used to be wary of closer China-Pakistani relations. But over time, when increased China-Pakistan cooperation means that actually not only China-Pakistan benefit, also India can. For example, as I said earlier, with the CPEC in place, actually the countries in the region will benefit. For example, countries in Central Asia, in South Asia, in the Middle East, even countries in Africa. So India will see over time, at the end of the day, that this kind of cooperation between China and Pakistan will benefit others, and China doesn't seek actually any exclusive interests in the region,
I'm
in
wondering
South
if
Asia,
India,
Central Asia,
excuse me,
even
jumping
in
in here.
Pakistan.
Let me bring in Musharraf. I'm just wondering if India will really see it that way, considering that basically it's having its port exclusive, its very strategic port excluded by the Chinese taking over the port in Pakistan. So I'm wondering where this leaves your relationship with India, including accessing the 8 submarines, and also where this leaves the US.
Well, so I mean, I think that India is growing at a pace, and India's role in the world and India's stature in the world is such that it doesn't behoove India to be threatened by Pakistan or any relationship that it has with any country. And I really don't think. I mean, I think there's a bunch of probably sort of older Indians that are perhaps saddled with the baggage of independence and what Indians call partition in 1947, but I don't think that the younger Indian generation, the generation that's voted in Prime Minister Modi, suffers from those complexes. I genuinely think India is a forward-looking power. It's got great potential. It's going to continue to grow, and a lot of what our colleague in Beijing just said is actually absolutely true. Not only will CPEC benefit China and Pakistan, but once Pakistan and India are able to sit down across the table and sort their issues out, and once trade of both goods and services starts, the CPEC route is very closely connected to the border with India, and so the cross-border trade between India and Pakistan is going to give India access to the port in Gwadar as well. I mean, I think that the positive sort of view of all this is that these 3 countries, to the extent that's possible, they'll continue to have disagreements on some very fundamental core issues, issues that are both, in terms of disputes like Kashmir and other kinds of issues.
Okay, so let me throw this last one very briefly to Rani, if I may, and briefly, if you will. Do you think China can succeed where Washington failed from an economic point of view and a security point of view?
Do you mean American investment in Pakistan? Yes, in fact, it's interesting to note here that at one time, just a couple of years ago, America tried to wrest control of the Gwadar port that China's building quickly, which is difficult considering that China has given 75% of the investment into that port. It didn't succeed. But US involvement in Pakistan is seen as variable. So it is quite possible that it's mutually beneficial for China and for Pakistan. And my colleague in Islamabad is absolutely correct in that India and my colleague, and this is endorsed by my colleague in Beijing, that India is really reaching out to both Pakistan and China with the new Modi government in power. India isn't a soft touch, though, and is expanding its military quite rapidly.
Rani Singh, I'm terribly sorry. We have run out of time, so forgive me for interrupting you there. But thank you so much to all 3 of my guests. Fascinating conversation. Rani Singh, Musharraf Zaidi, and Jia Xiudong. And of course, thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. You can get in touch with us. Go straight to our program page at aljazeera.com. Post your comments at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or tweet us. Go to @AJ Inside Story and @Jane Dutton. From all of the team, bye for now.